Obrigada, Catarina. Boa tarde, Porto. Good afternoon. That was a good introduction. I'll just tell you before I get started a bit about of myself. I'm indeed a lawyer, another one. I'm a political scientist, and professionally I consider myself as a civil society activist. I've been always working on issues of social justice, poverty, and human rights, and I have the belief that both combining citizens' mobilization but also getting the legal frameworks in place is how you can achieve change. And then I've been in the Panda family now for a few months, and I'll tell you why I came to the environment and the climate movement. And it has to do first with my own childhood. Afros also referred to that, to the beauty and the happiness that nature gave me when I was a child. The lakes also where I swam, the Mediterranean beaches with not that much plastic at the time, or the Pyrenees in my region. And just thinking that my own children and grandchildren won't be able to benefit from that, for me was unacceptable. And as many has now said, the time to act is now. So I said, it's now or never. And here I am, speaking after two amazing speakers. And I'll tell you a bit what public policies can do to tackle climate change. But also, let's remind me first to start that we live in an incredible place that is called the planet Earth. That is the home to us, but it's also the home to amazing wildlife, to landscapes, to plants. And we are all at risk, because as we've seen in the images, climate change is real and is deadly serious. And out of control will threaten our lives and the life of the species, but also the places where we live and how we work. And of course, that includes, important sectors like the wine industry. And there's also hope. I think this is also the important part of the message. We've heard already about solutions to tackle climate change, but if we do it fast enough, I think the speed is really important. So bear with me, don't fall asleep. There will be coffee afterwards, I promise you, but I'll tell you a bit how we can build a net zero emissions society by working with politicians, by working with public policies, but also working with businesses and the private sector. And Mayor Moreira, just to start with the bad news, I think we all are starting with the bad news, told us about the people in England, sunbathing in February. I live in Brussels, which is a rather chilly part of Europe. We were also sunbathing and making barbecues. And this is not a one-off, because we know that the last 20 hottest years ever happened within the last 22, and the hottest 5 years happened within the last 5 years. And we've also saw the images of the devastating forest fires, Portugal, in Sweden as well, extreme heat waves, droughts, but also massive floods across Europe and elsewhere. And we are in uncharted territory, because there hasn't been so much CO2 into the atmosphere for at least 800,000 years. So that's really, really, really long. And we've talked about targets. We talk about temperature rise. And if we continue in this trend, it's going to get worse. Our governments committed to keep the global rise of temperatures at 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels. But we know that we've already reached the 1 degree. And when last year the UN climate change report was released, they showed that we could reach the 1.5 degrees in as little as 12 years, if we don't act now. Anything beyond this rise of 1.5 degrees is going to be catastrophic. And the bad news is that we are set to exceed even 3 degrees. So just to give you an example that is very close to our heart as a conservation organization on what 1.5 degrees means. So if the temperature rise by that much, scientists estimate that we are going to lose about 90% of the world coral reefs. But if we reach 2 degrees, we will lose them all. And that means not just losing beautiful species, it's a mass extinction. is losing a quarter of marine species. And as many as 1 billion people depend on a way or another on coral reefs for food, for income, and for coastal protection. And climate change is not only an environmental emergency as well. The extreme weather that we are seeing, the heat waves, they are also going to impact pollution as well. They are going to impact our health. And we risk going backwards on some of the health benefits, even life expectancy, that we've been seeing in the last years. We know also the water scarcity, global warming can fuel as well the resource-based conflicts. And we've talked, for instance, about seeing many more climate refugees. And the economic damage rise at the same time as the temperature is rising, because natural disasters costed to the world $160 billion last year. So staying below 1.5 degrees will also save some money. And the wine industry is at the front of this fight on climate, because I guess I don't need to tell you how different wine regions in the world, from Southern Europe to California or Australia, are already feeling it. You can feel it in the quality of the grapes, because high temperatures are affecting the sugar as well. But the threat that poses droughts, storms, or water scarcity. And I'll end now with the bad news. So despite the doom and the gloom, we are not giving up, because solutions exist, and we've heard some, and I'll share a bit more. And every part of society is starting to play its part. And there I would link with a first presentation about the unprecedented public mobilization and pressure that we are seeing now, asking for real action to tackle climate change. And my own kids have gone on a strike for climate, telling me that they are hotter than the climate. And we've seen thousands of school children in the streets of Brussels and many European and now increasingly in the world really striking for climate and marching to ask leaders for real action. And they are now the most visible part of this movement, and the one that gives me a lot of hope, because in a few years' time, these young kids will be voting, and they know for whom they are going to vote. But businesses, as we've seen, they are already making the switch. They are already moving to renewable energies. Investors as well. They are pulling the money out of the dirty assets into clean technologies. And policymakers, at national and in local authorities as well, they are establishing targets and putting measures in place to cut emissions and boost clean energy. And on this, I'm also particularly happy to be in Porto today, because I'd like to highlight the role that our host country, Portugal, is playing, a very progressive role. Portugal is aiming to become carbon neutral by 2050. And it was amongst a group of leading member states of the European Union which urged the European Commission to set a direction towards net zero greenhouse gas emissions in the EU by 2050. And this is partly what I do, and maybe it doesn't sound very exciting, though I really believe that's a very exciting job. That's part of my day-to-day job, is talking to politicians, not only in Brussels, I do it a lot with my colleagues across the WWF offices in the European Union, to convince them to really move to this net zero carbon Europe. And we do it by trying to influence some of these European Union policies. And one that is particularly important these days, as keeping us busy, is this draft of an EU longer-term climate strategy that I mentioned before. Because this strategy sets, for the first time, for a major group of economies, how we could reach net zero emissions by 2050. And as part of the analysis that accompanies the strategy, it shows that in doing so, GDP and employment would increase in the EU. The EU would become a global leader in the green economy. It would provide 200 billion euro per year in health benefits and will save us trillions of euros on fossil fuel imports. So, and that's even considering the benefits of stopping climate change itself. So from an economic, a health, and an environmental policy perspective, it's a no-brainer. But for my organization, what is clear is that we need to do more, and we need to do it faster. And I've heard that people don't like targets. We do. And net zero emissions in the EU by 2050, it's too late. We should aim to reach by 2040, 10 years earlier. Why? Because if we delay serious action until the 2030s, the cost of the transition is going to be even higher and could blow our chances of staying at the 1.5 degree temperature rise. So in practical terms, really, what does it mean? 5 things. And I'm not telling nothing really new to you, but it's always good to clearly remind them. First, it means radically improving energy and resource efficiency. How? By renovating all our building stocks or by moving to a fully circular economy. Secondly, a complete phase-out of fossil fuels, such as coal, oil, and gas. And we could start also by ending fossil fuel subsidies and public investment in fossil fuel structures like pipelines. The third, massively expanding wind and solar energy. The dramatic fall in the cost of wind and solar means that a 100% renewable energy system is realistic and could be cost-effective possibility. And last but not least, and I have other ideas if you want to discuss further, this is where nature comes into the picture. It means being much smarter about the way we use land and also touch it upon that. But instead of unsustainable, intensive agriculture, we need to shift to healthier diets with less meat, less dairy as well, and we have to restore the carbon-rich ecosystems. We've mentioned forests, but wetlands as well. They are natural carbon sinks. They can actually suck the CO2 from the atmosphere. So this is a big part of the work that we do as WWF in Europe. We push these solutions into the public debates with policymakers, and we advocate for them at the level of the European Union, but also nationally with our offices and locally. And the message is, as it has been said, and I could not agree more, that we need all parts of society to take the part on the game. And our motto in WWF is together possible. And I'll tell you very briefly also how we are working with businesses. We've heard some interesting initiatives, and I think this is the value as well, that initiatives pop up, we share, we exchange, and we complement each other. And we've seen how companies, you are also here representing an industry, can lead innovation and transformation. We've seen with Max Burgers. We also support those companies. So to support and encourage them, we have developed the Science-Based Targets Initiative, together with the Carbon Disclosure Project, the UN Global Compact, and the World Resource Institute. And the initiative aims at helping companies to set greenhouse emissions reduction, and these are considered science-based if they are in line with the level of decarbonization that is required to remain within the temperature increase that is set in the Paris Agreement. So far, we have more than 500 companies who have joined this initiative, including as well a Chilean wine company, Viña Concha y Toro. And they've achieved a fantastic 30% reduction of emissions throughout the life cycle of the product. And there's another initiative as well that we are partnering with the World Resource Institute called the Renewable Energy Buyers Principle. And this helps firms to buy cost-effective renewable energy. I talk as well about investors, because this is also where the big money is. And now we are seeing more and more investors, either because regulation or self-regulation, moving out the money from the risky carbon-intensive investments and making their portfolios much more climate resilient. And not just because it's good for the planet or people, it's also because it's good for business. But my role is really to call on politicians, particularly in the European Union. This is a region that is also very close to my heart and where I work, to move much, much faster and to enable to get to these net zero emissions by 2040, in just 21 years' time. By the time, my kids will be voting already, so I have hope. And I have also a message for the wine industry, because here you have a powerful voice. You and the people who work for you will be the first impacted by the climate change. And your business, but also your personal lives will suffer about that. So we've seen how you, for instance, can decide to make change throughout your production, how you can set targets, reduce emissions, even become climate positive, as we've heard. But you also have a role as advocates, as part of society. You have a role to tell politicians what needs to be done. You have a role in getting organized with other climate-friendly parts of the industry and to call for action. I can tell you the fossil fuel industry is very well organized. And you can get mobilized. And of course, you can tell your consumers why they can mobilize also. And despite everything, I like politics. I believe we are very lucky to live in our democracies, despite the many challenges we have. And now, at least in Europe, I'm sorry for being so Eurocentric, we have a great opportunity. Because every 5 years, I was explaining, there's a change in the European Union, and we have the only elected institution in the world, the European Parliament, and it's going to happen in a few months. We have a great opportunity. Why? Because the European Parliament can change the EU laws on energy and on climate, and can co-decide with your national governments. So now is the time to go and talk to political parties, talk to politicians, and ask them to put climate and environmental regulation at the core of the future of Europe. And I think this is a very exciting agenda for the future of our continent, tackling climate change and stopping environmental degradation. And Katarina referred very well to next year. It's going to be a super policy year. Key decisions will be made on climate, on environment, on the sustainable development goals. And of course, the policy people as me, we are all very excited. But that's a great opportunity to put nature much higher in the political agenda. Because nature, as some of the kids are telling in Belgium when they demonstrate, they said, we don't defend nature. We are the nature who's defending itself. And nature will also protect us against climate change. So as my previous fellow speakers, I would really like to conclude with a message of hope, because we know that's a crucial time in human history and for the planet. And I've talked about the wonderful wildlife, the landscape, the mountains, the lakes, the beaches. They are all at risk. We are all at risk. We are seeing that we are going to the 6th mass extinction, and it will affect us. It will hit us. And again, I'm also a mother myself, and I think that life on a depleted planet will be very tough for my children and my grandchildren, and I cannot accept that. So events like this create platforms for once again ensure that we seize this opportunity to tackle climate change head on. Everyone, from us NGOs to politicians, business, citizens, young leaders, investors, and of course the wine industry, have their part. We know that we can do it, and we don't have time to lose. Together possible. Thank you.